We're here today with Wharton professor Barbara Kahn to talk about her new research, which takes a look at how store display design can impact choice. Barbara, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So first of all, can you give us kind of a brief overview of the research?
Well, this is part of a general stream that I do on perceived variety. So I'm interested in assortments, and one of the key variables of an assortment is how much variety is in the assortment. But my little take on it is instead of looking at actual variety, I'm interested in the perceived variety. And so in all the experiments that I've done recently, I hold the actual variety constant, and I change the perception of variety and measure that.
I think perceived variety is probably really the key there, because even if a store would have lots of things for sale, if people think they have very little, it doesn't really matter how much they have.
Exactly.
And now, what are kind of the key takeaways? You found that there's a pretty significant difference between vertical store display and horizontal.
Right. Well, so this actually, just to go back to your point for a second, that is what's interesting about perceived variety versus actual variety. So sometimes, as you're alluding to, the actual variety is too much. They can't take it in. So I would argue in that case the perceived variety is smaller than the actual variety. But in other cases, the actual variety is small, and you might want to do something to increase the perceived variety. And this research is more in that stream. And so what we found is if you take the exact same number of items, the same number of items, the same actual variety, and array them either horizontally or vertically, it changes the perception of variety.
Now, talk a little bit more about what people see when they see a vertical display versus what they see when they see a horizontal display.
And this is a very, very, very subtle effect. And it doesn't last for a long time, but it lingers. And so what we found is when it's horizontal, since your eyes are horizontal, what we call binocular vision, you can take in the items in the assortment more easily. It's called higher perceptual fluency. And that, because it's just a little bit easier to take in the items when it's horizontal, you think there's more variety there. When it's vertical, because your eyes aren't arrayed horizontally, you can't take as much in at once. And also, you tend to move your head a little bit, which is just that much harder. And so initially, the ease of processing the items in the vertical assortment is harder than in the horizontal and that gives you this illusion of more perceived variety. Now, clearly, after a few seconds, the effect goes away. I think the effect lasts less than 3 seconds. So it's not a big effect. But because people don't care that much and they don't overthink this, their initial perceptions linger, and they think there's more perceived variety.
So even if they looked a little harder and realized, oh, there's more here than I thought, they're still going to sort of have that initial impression stuck in their head, which I would think could potentially impact their buying decisions.
Right, and that's where we're going with it, right. So the idea is if you think there's a little bit more perceived variety, you tend to seek more variety in your choices, and when you seek more variety in your choices, you tend to overall purchase more. So we ran a number of experiments. Sometimes we held constant, or we controlled the number of items they could choose. So we'd had arrays of candies that were horizontal or vertical, and we said pick 3. And in that case, we were just measuring whether they picked 3 different ones or fewer than 3 different ones. And we found in the horizontal, they tended to choose more variety, holding the number of items constant than they did in the vertical one. But in a store experiment we ran, we didn't hold anything constant. We just observed. And we arrayed the display either horizontally or vertically. And we found in the horizontal assortment, they chose more different types, which resulted in more purchases overall. And so they chose more items when they were arrayed horizontally than when they were arrayed vertically. And they had no difference in the perception of the design of the assortment. That wasn't what was driving it.
Now, with key takeaways for this for businesses, is it necessarily that everybody should be changing their displays to horizontal, or is it more complicated?
Yeah, it's more complicated. So I guess the idea is if you want people to choose more than one in a product category, then it might be better to array them horizontally. And you might think a lot of times stores just kind of get to this finding themselves by, they don't really understand why. But a lot of times if you're looking within a category and you're choosing more than one type, they are arrayed horizontally. And then if you're only going to choose one, like your favorite or something like that, that tends to be arrayed more vertically. So we noticed that stores kind of followed this rule almost intuitively, but it does depend. If you want people to choose the most preferred or be brand loyal to something, then a vertical assortment might make more sense.
Now, these days, we're making our purchases not just in a brick-and-mortar store, but also online. Now, does this research only have implications for the brick-and-mortar store, or are there also implications here for how a display might be set up on an online website, even though they don't really use shelves per se.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. In fact, we did run experiments in stores and physical displays, but we also ran them online. And there we use graphic design to kind of make the assortment look like it was horizontal, or to graphic design to make it look vertically, and we definitely found these effects online.
Now, what would you say would be kind of if I am a customer? I mean, are there implications there for me as well? I mean, just to sort of check your perceptions when you come in, or I mean, anything like that?
I guess it doesn't matter that much. It's just, I mean, a lot of the things that I do don't affect choice that much. It's on the margin, affects the marketer actually a little bit more, because I don't think there's a mistake here. Sometimes some of the things that we find we're tricking the consumer, but in this case, I don't think we're tricking them. We're just arraying it in such a way that it's more pleasing.
And what's next for this research? What are you going to take? Are you going to take this further, or is there another sort of similar, related stream to this that you're also working on?
Yeah, I do a lot of work on this notion of perceived variety. So I've looked at things holding everything constant, whether if it's visually depicted or verbally depicted, how that affects perceived variety. I've also looked at what you were talking about earlier, the idea if there's too much choice, what can we do to make it simpler? And you're seeing in retail a kind of a trend, particularly on the online and stuff like that, to find these curated assortments. So more is, less is more kind of the idea, because people get so overwhelmed with choice. But I find that if one of the advantages of online assortments is you can have really big assortments. And so you can, cater to the heterogeneity of preferences with a very large assortment. And so if you can learn some of these cues about how to make the variety seem less or more depending on what your goal is, you can still have big assortments. So that's kind of where I like to go with it.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure, it was fun. Thank you.